All right, I believe we are live.
Hell yeah.
Awesome. Well, everybody, welcome. This is our Google Hangout, our NaMo home evening, as we call it, that we do every month. We try and make it on the first Monday of every month. It doesn't always happen for various reasons, but we do have a special guest, Mr. Atheist. Jimmy, thank you so much for joining us, man. Really looking forward to this.
It is my absolute honor to be here.
Recently, we had a little bit of a chat on your show.
Yeah.
And I then went on after hanging out with you for a while and watched a ton of your videos and had a good bit of fun with, with watching your videos. So what is it that you do, man? What brings you to the moniker of Mr. Atheist?
Yeah. Okay. So specifically the reason why I go by Mr. Atheist, which I genuinely often think about changing it because I want to be more active in the ex-Mormon community, and Mr. Atheist often sort of implies that it's just atheism all the time. But Mr. Atheist itself comes from, I have a Thursday show called Dear Mr. Atheist, where I answer the questions that atheists are asked over and over and over again. I am in fact an atheist. But I got the name from Josh Feuerstein, who would start videos by going, "Dear Mr. Atheist, first of all, let me correct you because evolution is not and has never been a science. It isn't." And so he kept doing this, "Dear Mr. Atheist." And I was like, who's he actually talking to? I Googled it and I went to my web tools and realized that Mr. Atheist, no one had taken up the mantle yet. So I decided to take it up.
The mantle, how very Mormon of you.
Indeed. Indeed. or comic book lover. I mean, it's in both. Yeah.
Fair enough. It's all fantasy anyway. So you've recently been doing previous to doing some doing these ex-Mormon and Mormon videos, you've done a whole bunch of work in atheism, but I want to just spend a little bit of time talking about your Mormon advocacy and education, because the videos that I have seen that you've done about Mormonism, Mormon history, it seems like they have been geared towards being accessible to people who know absolutely nothing about Mormonism.
Sure. Yeah. It's a little bit. It's a little bit of both, I think. I hope. Maybe I need to reevaluate. But Dear Mr. Atheist, once a month becomes What's Wrong with Mormonism. And so usually I have this, for this last month, I haven't done it, but there's this voice I do that is supposed to be like a weird Richard Dawkins, maybe when he's younger and much more feminine voice. And so each episode starts with something like, "Dear Mr. Atheist, what could you possibly think is wrong with Mormonism?" And you see my little caricature up there. And so, once a month we go over like specific problems. And I grew up as a Mormon. I had a father who was in bishoprics and stake presidencies. I had it drilled in. He was my seminary teacher as well as lots of people's seminary teachers.
Wow.
I mean, it was, a very indoctrinated home. And so I started off, for example, with talking about the natural man, the whole Mosiah, natural man, enemy to God, the way it's been used to make people feel terrible about being themselves. And then I've just kind of gone through with that. I personally, now I'm not trying to start beef with anybody, but I think the telling of the first vision that I do on my video about the first vision is the best one out there. That's just how I feel about it. There's several bits in it. I don't know. I really like that one.
Well, and to let people know who haven't ever seen any Mr. Atheist videos, you add little pictures and captions and you add stuff to jazz it up and make it more interesting. So it's not just staring at your mug in front of a camera.
Right.
It's definitely more interesting than just that.
There was so in that video specifically, there's like, I made a lot of these caricatures, and one of them is him discovering the golden plates, but it's like just a bunch of pancakes on the end of a shovel. It's kind of hard to explain. And then there was another bit I did in there because of Joseph having this almost like Messiah-like status in there. I knew it would get under Mormon skin a little bit so I basically was like, look, I want everyone to know I don't hate him. So every time I say his name, I'll get a little more casual. And by the end, I'm calling him like Jay Smizzle and such. I mean, and we had this name tag bit up there. It was, I don't know. That part was enjoyable, but there is a lot of actual serious stuff in it. It's not all just jokes and they're all making a point. This month specifically, I've made Mormon month on my channel, and we've been talking about like Mormon history with the LGBT community.
Let's talk about that a little bit, because that's something I have not done enough studying in myself. And
Yeah.
I know that there are some other media outlets that have discussed a bit about the very sordid and colorful history that the church has with LGBTQ people.
Yeah.
And I found that your video, your first video in all of it, no, sorry, your most recent video in all of it was very instructional. I learned a lot. So
Sure.
Tell us a little bit about that.
So far we've done 2 that are specific to the timeline. And it's kind of funny because like at first I was like, okay, 20 to 30 minutes, I can cover the whole timeline. Right. And then it was like, nope, not even close. So I did the first 150 years in the first video. And there's even a lot in there, but it's more spaced out. Like I was jumping by years at a time. And there's a lot of stuff like, there's not a whole lot to figure out what Joseph Smith felt about homosexuals or anyone.
Nothing really.
Yeah, and in fact, the only thing there really is that he was definitely involved in discovering somebody was having gay sex, and that person was excommunicated, but not by Joseph's wishes. I'm getting a huge buzz in my ear.
Yeah, I'm sure. Is that mine? I think it's Mindy.
Okay, good. Yeah. It was starting to get painful. And the only thing you actually see in there is actually one of his, I'm trying to remember who it was, but one of his, I think it was one of his first counselors saying that, implying at least that the amount of leeway he's giving this individual who was discovered having gay sex may have had something to do with that Joseph might have been doing stuff with dudes too, which totally wouldn't surprise me. Like people as polyamorous as him tend to start not segregating their holes as much as they go. I don't know the right way to put that.
Very close bosom friends, as he called them.
Yeah. Then you've got like Brigham Young, who's oddly not hateful for once about something. Pretty much anytime someone was discovered to have these relationships, he'd just send them on a mission somewhere. He didn't preside over any excommunications. Now, as governor, he did preside over a legislature that passed some anti-gay laws, but he himself as the president of the church didn't. But then you start to see this like sordid history, and especially when BYU gets established and you start to see the church, who at that time was 100% running BYU, which is something that I'm going to get into a lot as I do this last timeline this coming week, this coming Thursday, as you start to see the church and BYU separate a little bit on policies and issues. But back then, I mean, it's completely run by the church. And you see these weird like moments of individual presidents not really giving a shit. And then the next guy hates them. Like it's
a weird fluctuation. And I like that you pointed out that there was almost like almost a Newport type of purging at BYU for any of them queers that might be in attendance, where they held these inquisitions to make sure that none of them were fooling around. They were all keeping the law of chastity. And there were, you pointed out that there were these kind of like ebbs and flows and these lulls where it didn't seem to be as much of an issue. But at other times, then it's such much more hard line. And I like what Christy said in the the chat on YouTube here. Hashtag whole segregationist. In response to something you said earlier.
I'll be incorporating that in a future episode. I often write down like the jokes that I'm like, I think of in the spot and like use again later.
Real comedy.
You even have moments where they're all outright accepting, but it's funny. I'm going to actually, I want to make sure I get names and dates right, but I'm actually pull up some of this timeline stuff. But it's funny how you have right before the policy is as strict as it's ever been, you actually have a prophet and president of BYU who have a live and let live policy. And the president at the time, who, again, I don't want to mess up which one it was because it's the internet. So, but the president at the time meets with these 2 guys. He notes it in his planner. It's just 2 p.m. homosexual. That's all that's written in there. So, but in regards to this meeting, not what he was doing at a truck stop later.
Well, I was going to say, like, that could mean a lot of things.
It really could. Yeah. This is right before Spencer W. Kimball, might have been before him. And I could pull it up, but You have, yeah, and he gives them the advice to be the best they can be. But then you have, just a few years later, the president of BYU coming and saying, if you even feel gay, we don't want you here. We don't want you here infecting other people. If it's private, Mormons like to point to this idea that it was always hate the sin, love the sinner, which isn't really true until kind of late 90s, early 2000s. And you see the transition of Gordon B. Hinckley's view on it as the church, even before he becomes president, his development on the issue is where the church goes from always it's just wicked to be that way and unnatural to, okay, you can be born and this can be a thing. The same-sex attraction can be something you're born with, but they still to this day call it unnatural, or a crime against nature. Was, I think, most recently cited in 2014, if I'm remembering my timeline right. So they still have these mixed feelings about it, and now they've got this love the sinner, hate the sin, but they act like that was always the case. And no, it was very much if you have the attraction, something's wrong with you.
Right. It's an infection. You're going to catch the gay, as Alice and people are pointing out in the chat.
Yeah, don't catch the gay.
We play Catch the Gay at Pride.
Did you really? Was there an actual game called? Oh, okay.
That's what Alice is saying. She said it has a very different meaning.
Yeah, let's catch the gay. Oh my God, I know.
I love you, Alice.
That's beautiful. That is beautiful.
So I want to point this out as well. And I think that this is necessary because none of us grew up in the 1930s and 40s and 50s to know what it was like, to know what the culture was above and beyond what the policies or what were in certain certain publications or whatever about it. Right. It was a lot more the culture. Like, I remember my dad growing up in the 70s saying that if we knew that there was a kid that was gay, we'd beat the hell out of him in school.
Yeah.
So I wonder how much of it was just like it was so incredibly overly repressed that it just never became an issue. It was never talked about to any extent. And only now in the past, 30 to 40 years, have people actually been speaking out about it and been advocating for LGBTQ rights.
Right.
I don't know if there's any way to put that into historical context.
Yeah, there's something. So you're not going to find this is when the church said stop beating the queers. But you will see, like, here's when BYU was doing shock aversion therapy and doesn't drop it until the mid 80s. You also get to see like some of the first instances of, hey, if you're gay, just marry a woman, act like a man, and eventually you'll be a man. Right. Which is still
kind of the policy.
Yeah, exactly. And they will deny it. And in fact, you've got lots of people going on record since about the mid 90s saying marriage is not a therapy. However, it's still like, so go get your therapy, whatever the right therapy is, and then get married. It's almost like rehab is what they think as far as people who drink or do drugs. Like rehab is
you're
going through
to the gay.
And then after, instead of going to Gay Anonymous, you get married. Like that's kind of there's got to be a Gay Anonymous somewhere. And by the way, it was George Albert Smith, the one that was just like, do your best, you guys.
God. Yeah. I almost never do this. I don't have it close by, but I almost never go to DI. But whenever I do, any non-Utah people in the chat here or watching this, DI is Deseret Industries, the church's owned thrift store where they typically employ underprivileged people to staff these, and they make a ton of money off Deseret Industries. It's really quite the racket. They have the bookshelf section there with tons of bookshelves full of old Mormon books that nobody ever buys because they are so horrible and antiquated. And I picked up this book called I think it's The Teachings of David O. McKay, which David O. McKay was after George Albert Smith, before Spencer W. Kimball. I haven't read through it yet, but it was released at about the same time that Mormon Doctrine was released. The book by Bruce R. McConkie, and I think McConkie's book sucked all the oxygen out of the book buying air when it was released, and that this was something that kind of slid under the radar. So needless to say, if I'm to understand the culture of the church and its views on gays in the 1950s and 60s, that ought to be quite an interesting read.
Yeah, I'll check it out myself. The funny thing is you have in the 50s, the end of the 50s is where you start to see like the George Albert Smith stuff, and this is right before things get bad. Earlier 50s, you see what was the guy's name? I can find him quick. Gordon Affleck. This is in 1945, so right before things get. Oh, and sorry, I was off by a decade. George Albert Smith's late 40s. So that's right before things get bad. But like 1945, that's when you start to see the church get creepy with their stuff, because George Affleck is actually asked to surveil the steam rooms at Deseret Gym for gay activity.
Oh,
yeah. I'm sure he validated it. And then you've got, but yeah, so in 48 is when the George Albert Smith
for research
purposes. There's, oh man. So then you start to get people in the early 50s, Harold B. Lee's talking about Sodom and Gomorrah. Another apostle picks that up later. And you see this transition of the church going from whatever to back to like no, let's start shock therapy. And I think the person who set the tone for homophobia in the church was Spencer W. Kimball, who was also the homosexual specialist. Was what I think. Let me see what the exact title was. But yeah, I mean, you see with him, you see stuff in the miracle of forgiveness. You see him behind a lot of the speeches and talks about it. He's assigning a lot of the people who are, he's picking the heads of these departments and these therapy programs. And he's the one who starts the concept, or makes it more mainstream in the church anyway, this idea that it's totally curable. You're not born this way. You can prevent it. You can head off your kids from being gay. Yeah, it was something like homosexual specialist. It was just a really funny title.
Here, I'm trying to find if it's even mentioned in Mormon doctrine. I have my first edition Mormon doctrine here from Bruce R. McConkie, and I don't know. I've never read or looked it up to see if he talks about it at all, but I'm trying to find homosexuality here. Yeah,
McConkie tickles queers, just tickles queers a little bit in the 80s, like early 80s.
Here we go. Homosexuals see sex immorality. All right. Let's see what it has to say about sex immorality. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying he just tickles the issue a little bit. Bruce R. McConkie, as I was doing all of my research and I did it for the first episode, I got done with mentioning something by him and was like, oh, the next episode is probably just going to be a McConkie fever, and it wasn't actually. He of all the things he doesn't near as much as Spencer W. Kimball go after it, and in fact, all the stuff from McConkie is pretty much just restating Kimball's shit.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So the sex immorality section is huge in Mormon doctrine, but here we go. Every degree and type of lewdness, lasciviousness, and licentiousness, of concupiscence, I don't know what that word is, prostitution and whoredoms, of sodomy, onanism, and homosexuality, of masturbation, incontinence, I don't know why that's necessary, and perversion, of rape, seduction, and infidelity, of adultery, fornication, and uncleanness. So he definitely was towing the party line in that. Can't be terribly surprised.
Kimball, you see through the 70s, late 60s, 70s, and then even toward his death. I mean, they're publishing guides. They're claiming that homosexuality is sourced from having there's a few things. They hypothesize that it's from having like a strong mom and a weak dad. And then toward the end of his life, it's much more like, no, all queers were molested. Like that's kind of the direction they take it. Oh
joy. Oh Kimball.
It's funny because I know I've been switching my queer use so far. So as a member of the LGBTQ community and someone who identifies as queer, there's like a nice version of queer, and then there's like the pejorative queer.
Take the words back.
With this topic, you have to use both. And so then they were like, you goddamn queers. Versus like me and my queer friends. But yeah, so you've got man, this is just such a funny one to write too. I'm trying to just look at my script with the timeline to give some good dates, but then I like see where I put like 1978 rolls around and Kimball's trio of heteronormativity. I just referring to the first presidency.
Of course.
Oh yeah, and that's another thing. Kimball was around when the Equal Rights Act was potentially going to pass again, and so that even more put it in front of the homosexual specialist desk.
And I have this book, Big Engine, Little Engine, Mormon Engine, that came out during Kimball's era, talking it's a fictional narrative that's created about the Indian placement program, and I know Kimball was quite the champion of that program as well. And I think, was Evergreen started under Kimball, or was Evergreen prior to Kimball?
I think Evergreen was started under Kimball. Let me see if Evergreen International, actually, it might be right after he dies. No, it couldn't be that late.
Because I know Evergreen has been dissolved today, but runs under the banner of like North Star Counseling.
Basically, they gave all of their assets, to, I think you're right, that's North Star.
But still exists in some kind of form.
Yeah. It was, they didn't quite go away, but then they went away. I know what you're saying.
So to address something that came up in the chat earlier, yes, it looks like we do have David Michael here. Let's see if he's at his mic. Are you there, David? Maybe not.
Oh, so wow, it was really late. 1989 is when Evergreen International existed.
89.
Yeah,
wow.
Yeah, right before I was born.
That's was that the Howard Hunter year or 2 years or whatever? Gordon B. Hinckley takes over in 94. So if Howard Hunter was only 2 years, does he take over in 94 or 92? So that's either Benson. That's probably Benson, and I think Hunter must have taken over in like 91 or 92 or something like that. And Benson didn't even have that long of a run. By that time, Gordon B. Hinckley was pulling a lot of the shoestrings. Right. And Packer too. Boyd K. Packer was running a lot of shit on the back end too. Who did For the Strength of Youth in 1990? Because that's when they start talking about homosexuality and For Strength of Youth as well. I think that was largely under the direction of Hinckley. I could be wrong. I remember when Howard W. Hunter died, and I was born in 1990. And so I think I was 4. Because I just really doubt I remember anything at 2 years old, but I remember my mom crying about it. Oh, okay. Interesting. Yeah. Well, needless to say, weird early memory to keep.
Hey, Bryce.
I remember that and a ball I got for my birthday.
Right on. We do have David. It's hard to hear.
Someone was asking for me. I haven't joined one of these in like a year, and I just suddenly popped in, and suddenly you're like, people are asking about you. I was like, wow, okay.
Oh, that buttery smoothness. Oh, that's so good. Yeah, Brian says he needs that buttery smooth baritone voice. It is glorious.
There you go, Brian. Yeah, you might hear the Illinois cicadas going crazy behind me, but a little noisy out here, but I guess I could go inside. But
you need some seagulls to swoop in and eat those things up.
Oh, yeah. Did you pray?
Yeah. Well, there's something like a 17-year swarm, they call it. I think it's 17 years. That the cicadas just like take over the world around here. It's like a plague or something. So I don't know if this is it, but man, they are loud this year.
We've had a good number up in Denver as well recently for some reason.
Maybe this is the one. It's probably like 12 years. For some reason, whatever. Could be wrong.
It's a plague. But anyway,
well, I don't want to interrupt the flow. I really just came in to listen, but since you asked for me, I thought I'd say hi. So please
good meeting you, David.
Don't want to, steal anybody's thunder. So good to meet you too, Mr. Atheist. And how you doing, Bryce? It's been a while.
Fantastic. It's good to see you again, even if I'm only just staring at a stock photo.
All right. Let me see.
Uh-oh.
We definitely lost audio because the cicada stopped. That's an easy one to track.
Well, that's because I'm an idiot and I hit the mute button instead of the turn video on button. So there you go.
Gotcha. Now, are those garments you're wearing?
Yeah, right. They kind of look like it.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, a little
Afraid it's just
in the
afraid it's
breast.
just a V-neck white T-shirt. Not as
Ah.
exciting.
How will you remember that
Yeah.
every knee shall bow or whatever bullshit they say it is now?
Well, I wasn't indoctrinated into that particular cult, so I didn't have to unlearn any of that. Thanks.
Oh, got it. You're lucky, man.
I did.
sure.
I did my best to join, but no, just couldn't swallow it.
Couldn't get past the missionaries. You met with them once, and then that was.
I just meant the book
Stop
the books were unconvincing.
It's actually really funny because I've been just as a joke almost in my head entertaining the idea of like, what if as a creator I decided to document going back and repenting of my apostasy? But now that I've been studying like the most recent policies on LGBT stuff, I found out like I've done too much gay stuff that I don't think they'll take me back. I don't think like, or if they would, it'd be like, you can stay back there and be quiet. You will never bless the sacrament again. We know where those hands have been.
No sacrament for 1,000 years.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh man. While Satan's locked away. It's a good thing he's going to be locked away because I hear he is the prettiest angel.
Mm.
That's what I'm
Got
saying.
onto something there.
We're all going to hit that. I'm already
All right.
headed to outer
Well,
darkness.
I'm going back on mute. I got to start some bedtime rituals here for the little ones. So,
Oh, for the little ones. Okay.
For
but I'll keep listening in the
I did that
background.
differently in my head.
Oh. Children, Bryce, my children.
Yes. Okay. Cool.
All I know is I was talking about banging Satan and suddenly you had to go.
Well, I mean, I think my son's watching South Park, so I'm sure there's a few episodes on that at least.
The
Yeah.
ritual has begun.
Indeed.
Saddam's loving it. That's all I'm saying. Okay. For those of you who've not seen the South Park movie, you probably think I'm weird. But anyway.
Oh, that's so
Alrighty.
good.
Bye, everybody.
Good seeing you, man.
For years, I thought John Goodman did the voice of Satan on South Park. I don't know why.
I could see that voice coming out of John Goodman, but I don't think it is.
I don't think it is either. I know he did Santa in Futurama, at least for a while. But
Okay.
I'm pretty sure it's just one of the two guys just doing a deeper voice. I think it's Matt.
He wasn't Mr. or he wasn't Chef.
Yeah.
That killed
Did-
him.
Were you one of the people like myself who thought for years that Matt and Trey were ex-Mormons?
Yes. I was part of that meme for a little while, and it's like, oh no, they just like to laugh at Mormonism. Oh,
I was
damn it.
so bummed out, man. I always think ex-Mormons often make like the funniest people, but we still have Brendan Urie.
Who's Brendan Urie?
Oh, he's the lead singer of Panic at the Disco, and he is the actual most beautiful angel, which probably makes him Satan.
I don't think I've actually seen a picture of Brendan Urie. And Googling it when we get off the call.
Be
Okay.
careful. It may have been what turned me.
That's what gave you the gay.
That's what it is. Yeah, he's who I caught it from.
So were you also like me, where it's like South Park was one of the first things that caused you to think of like, oh shit, there's something wrong here?
That's funny, man, because no, quite the opposite. So for me, it was
Really?
Family Guy, and Family Guy didn't attack Mormonism directly, but Family Guy taught me to like laugh at myself a little bit, like get to unclench my asshole some, and realize that like things can be fun. And they made a few jokes here and there at Mormon's expense, but that was the one that really lighted me up. But then when I saw the episode about the Book of Mormon, it was all like, oh, that's not accurate. No, it was Urim and Thummim. That's not correct. Like it was a lot of like haha, like trying to be the cool kid in the show too. Like that's really funny, but that's not what really happened. What up?
Now, one
little
second,
man?
Jimmy. There's Roman. How's it going, buddy?
Good.
Haven't seen you in a long time, man. You've grown up.
Yeah. I know.
It's been a
Cool.
while since we've heard you on a podcast reading about the Book of Mormon. When is that going to happen again? Ask your dad.
What?
You're just nervous now.
Okay.
He's
fine.
meeting me, and I'm basically famous. That's why he's nervous.
That's exactly it.
That's not even close to true. I've tricked 3,000 subscribers into thinking that I'm worth listening to ever somehow. I did it, but it was a trick for sure.
Well, to give you a little background, Jimmy, when David was reading through, I think it was pretty early on. He was in Messiah or something. He got a hold of this Book of Mormon study guide for kids, and brought on Roman for an episode to read a little bit of it with him, and it was hilarious.
That's awesome.
Roman
So
helped
long ago,
craft something in my mind because he said it's what we should learn from this is that you shouldn't do drugs, and then it made me think, I bet Joseph Smith was on drugs, and thus my research in the Smith entheogen theory was born. So thank you, Roman.
Did Joseph ever do ayahuasca? Because seriously, the Book of Mormon seems like something you write on ayahuasca.
Yeah, possibly.
It
I don't know
could
if he
be.
had access to any of those recipes, but there were plenty of others. So
What about peyote? That seems like something
that's-
you would do.
that's really possible.
Yeah,
Very, very possible. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely.
Because the first missionaries grabbed Dr. Frederick G. Williams, the vegetable botanical doctor in Kirtland, and went out to meet with the Lamanites, the Native Americans. And that was their first mission trip. They were on a mission.
Oh my God.
So anyway, so
Mormon history is so
that's
fun.
research. Damn right, that's research.
Mhm.
That's a good kind of research.
That grand old research.
So
I don't remember where we left off, to tell you the truth.
I don't remember either. We were talking South Park, but I want to address what Brian just put in the chat. He said, "Did Jimmy know David Michael started the My Book of Mormon podcast? Have you ever heard of that, Jimmy?"
No, and so this is one of those things that I keep getting super embarrassed by. Prior to joining the YouTube community, I didn't really listen to many podcasts. The only ex-Mormon podcast I had heard was Infants on Thrones, because that was what my brother listened to. And then other podcasts, yeah, I just have never wasn't a big into watching YouTube channels or podcasts. And so now it's like catch up with everything everyone does.
Yeah, right.
It's been fun. But Naked Mormonism is the best ex-Mormon podcast.
Oh, and Mr. Atheist is the best ex-Mormon YouTube channel. All right.
Maybe best ex-Mormon.
Pull that out of my mouth real quick. All right. So South Park. When you saw the South Park episode, what was your thoughts?
Yeah, I was just my reaction was to go around and correct everyone. But again, like being the little blonde kid from the actual episode, like, haha, you're really fun and cool, guys. But well, that's funny. Let me tell you the real story. And I was doubling down on it almost made me angry even after leaving the church to be like, South Park found out about the seer stones in the hat before I did.
Yeah. And they also created an archetype of me and transplanted it into the TV show. God damn it.
Yeah. And that blonde kid, serious. It's funny though, because that blonde kid more represented what I was like at school and such. But as far as going home to family, it wasn't like, yay, Jimmy's home, like wholesome. We had like a super dysfunctional family, but we projected, and I kind of talk about this in an episode, the idea of being a beacon, how you have to appear a certain way to the rest of the world to make Mormonism look more attractive, whether or not that reflects your actual home life and family life. So I was like that out in the world, and I was going around telling people not to have sex or masturbate, even though I was jerking off like 7 times a day at the time. But the good old being a 15-year-old hypocrite, just you shouldn't do that. It makes sex less special. And then repeating terrible old tropes like the one from Spencer W. Kimball that masturbation can turn you gay. That was rough. Yeah. So
great culture we hail from. Yeah, awesome.
But then also being like the sprightly, like, hey everybody. So at the time everyone already thought I was gay. But then like, oh, he's not gay, he's just Mormon. And a little column A, a little column B. For the record, I feel like I've projected myself as completely gay in this. I actually identify as pan. Now, for people who want to know what that is, don't Google it. No, it just means I like all the gender identities. Anyway, that little tidbit aside. So yeah, I was the sprightly, like, hey everybody, let's all be pals and let's go to church dances and don't masturbate. And South Park wasn't so like, but that's so funny, but it was wrong. That was my kind of. approach at the time.
Interesting, because I had a different reaction when I watched the South Park or the Mormonism South Park episode. It nestled into my mind, and the seed was planted, but I didn't realize it. It required watching the Scientology episode for that seed to become fertilized. Right. Because as it's walking through Xenu and the volcano and the DC-10s and all the thetans and bullshit, when it prints at the bottom of the screen, this is what Scientologists actually believe. That was the time with there was the fertilizer, and that was a little bit of water that caused the seed to actually sprout. And I was like, oh, fuck.
Right. I don't.
How much did they get right in the Mormonism episode?
There is definitely things about that episode that stuck, and I revisited later. Like, okay, what if it wasn't that Martin Harris's wife just lost the pages? Because that's all I ever heard was that she lost them. She put them down at the store. What the fuck does that mean? I lost them. Well, I went over to Brookstone and I tried out the massage chairs. And anyway, I must have left it there. But the idea that it was actually a deliberate attempt to see if he was a fraud, like that was the first time I actually heard something like that. Someone said I ran out of toilet paper. Yeah, could be. Who knows? So there was definitely stuff from it that stuck later. And then there were little things where like my TBM whisper, which was the thing I was trying to remember the other day after I left the church, my TBM whisper would be like, it's still called the seer stones, Urim and Thummim. And so then I was like upset about like, well, they still didn't get it 100% right. But then you go back to history and go, actually, at one point, he did kind of think about calling the seer stones the Urim and Thummim, and then the breastplate narrative fabricated into existence.
Yeah. Weird. When after you do a thing and you make up a story about it, that story can mean all kinds of things. You can say whatever you want because it's not tethered to reality, and reality is a really stubborn thing.
As then illustrated later by, the guy's name, the guy who made all the fraudulent documents and such.
Yeah. Hoffman.
And all of those, like the fact that people weren't immediately suspicious shows you how crazy it was.
Yeah, which was just a baffling thing. And honestly, I think that Hoffman did a service for Mormon history that never would have been accomplished without him, in that it forced the church. I mean, he twisted the church's arm in many ways to be a bit more transparent about their history. And Alice said the Salamander letter was believable because it was all batshit crazy. Because
no kidding.
When you're nested that many levels into the batshit craziness, it's really hard to extract yourself just one level out. Right? You're so covered in the bullshit that it's just, you can't even make up which way is up. So
I have a question about just because this is a topic that interests me and you're the history guy. Do you believe that there is any actual photograph of Joseph out there?
I've looked at the one that historians have been debating about and read a couple of people that are just like blog posting about it. And that's the one that is like the degraded photograph that he's holding his hands in front of his chest.
So there's another one, and I'll have to
buy that or not, but he was at a time and a place in Washington, D.C. in 1840 or 1839 when it is possible, when there was also a photographer there.
Right.
Had enough money to hire the photographer. Therefore, it could have been actually Joseph Smith, and it comes from the right time and place, and it looks like an accurate daguerreotype, and it looks a fair amount like him. I've seen the death mask superimposed over that photograph. Right. And it looks pretty legitimate, but it's too tough to say. So
when I was 16 and we went to General Conference, I went with a guy called Mark Moore, which is such a generic name. I'm not worried about doxing him, but he was working with a guy who had a photo. And it's not the photo you're talking about. At least I'm pretty sure, because I think I've seen the photo you're talking about. And this guy writes a book about how they find it. They get it assessed. They have these experts who say that in comparing to the death mask, that if this isn't a picture of Joseph, it's his identical twin brother, all the stuff. And when we go to General Conference when I'm 16, this guy, Mark, is taking all of the evidence they have and has an actual meeting with general authorities. I don't think any of the apostles were there, but presents it all and basically gets told, there's a photo we think that is him that exists, but it's not this one. Was how he told it right after. And I mean, he came out super discouraged and upset about the whole thing. So
Interesting.
If that story is to be believed from him, that's what they said, then they seem to think at least one photo out there of him is authentic, but it's an anecdote and oddly specific. So nobody believed me until all the evidence is out there.
Fair. Yeah. Alice, what did the prophet say? Because that's what matters.
You'd think that as a prophet, he could just find it. He could just do, like, for example, what Joseph did, go out with some divining rods, but find where the photo's buried instead of some water or some magic stones.
Yeah, you don't need to actually toil about whether one of these daguerreotypes is actually Joseph Smith. You just get the rock, and you instantly God reveals Joseph's face to you. It's perfect. It's all part of his plan.
I love that layered dookie rock too. It's like, I remember first hearing, like, they've acknowledged it and they've published pictures of it from the vault and stuff. And I was like, all right, let's go have a look at this. And my expectations were high, and then they were just totally dashed by this poo rock. That's the best rock you have? Seriously?
Yeah.
Like, at least go
Have
with...
you seen the peyote stone though? The peyote stone is really cool.
Is that the green one?
I don't think it's green. I think the only photo of it that's ever been published is black and white.
Oh, okay. So I may not even know what the peyote stone is. The only other stone I know of is the stone that belonged to the woman. I think you might have told me about this. The stone that belonged to the woman that, where they find the property, there's like another seer, a stone looker on
Sally
that property.
Chase.
The sister, and she had like a green seer stone.
Yeah. Sorry to just show
No, you're
my
good.
torso to everybody, but it's not naked, so it shouldn't matter.
This time.
Let me see if I can really quickly, for anyone watching the video of it here. Yeah, this is Quinn's book. There's the peyote stone.
Oh, I have seen that. Yeah.
So that's one that he pulled that out of the Mississippi and carved it and gave it to Emma. And that was with Emma, and it was transferred or given to Louis Bideman at the time of her death. So
is that one that they speculated or even had record of, like, you would literally look through for some reason?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And then the spiritual light would shine through after you eat the actual peyote button that it looks exactly like. Yeah.
That's helping our peyote theory out.
It really is. Yeah.
My goodness. The whole thing so much. I'm actually going to be doing I'm going to be diving deeper into the Hoffman stuff at some point down the road. I've got a lot more Joseph Smith stuff I want to cover. Obviously, polygamy seems like a topic that people would enjoy. My stuff isn't in sequence necessarily. This timeline that I'm doing of the LGBT stuff is like uniquely in sequence. Otherwise, it's kind of just like, all right, what ruined my childhood? And then I do a video on the thing that comes to mind.
That's a good way to do it. One thing about polygamy is it's just so salacious, and it's so overtly anathema to the pious prophet narrative that we were all told about.
Right.
So polygamy stuff, like, it gets clicks and it sells books.
Yeah.
I think that the practice of polygamy itself isn't as important as the decisions that were made in order to make it possible.
Right.
Yeah.
And the back history of, like, Joseph's affairs and the way that Mormons purposefully misremember the order of events.
Yeah. Alice, the practice gets clicks and sells memberships. Yeah. Dependent on the sect, really, I think. But yeah, because, like, people want to know about the polygamy. They want to know whether or not Joseph Smith kissed his daughter-in-law or whatever. People want to know if he kissed his sister or, did anything like that, because it's so salacious. But I feel largely like those should be used as markers to describe the personality of Joseph Smith,
right,
and the fact of whether or not he did have intimate relationships with these people. I feel like it really doesn't matter as much as the decisions that he made in order to allow those to happen. And there was so many other things that were going on that were infinitely more interesting than relationship drama in Nauvoo.
I think so. A lot of my show is also directed toward like, I've left Mormonism. And we mentioned this the other day. You only need to know 1% of the facts to realize Mormonism is bullshit. The extra 99% is just gravy. But a lot of people, when they leave Mormonism, now want to go and see that gravy. And I think to that degree, it's important because so many people lie in the church and just directly say, there is no evidence that Joseph ever had sex with anyone besides Emma, which if only if evidence means an actual porno tape of the like that, if that's your standard.
Show us the DNA. That's it, right? He has to have kids. If he's having sex with 33 women, there must be a lot of descendants. Well, not when he has some medicine friends to take care of those little problems. Right.
Yeah, that's another thing. It's really fun to see how a Mormon reacts to your assertion that Joseph had many more abortions than any individual you know now.
We need the soiled sheets, like Joseph's shroud of Turin something. Yeah, right.
It's much crustier, has a worse stench. Oh, man.
Although I related in the Daughters of the Utah Pioneers Museum, which if any of you Utah inhabitants listening, watching, or are currently in the chat have not seen Shroud of Turin. Yes, you got. I couldn't think of it. Nicely done, Brian. Anyway, the Daughters of the Utah Pioneers Museum is the best museum in Utah for Mormon history, and it's not run by the church, and that's why it's the best, right? It's not all pretty and dressed up and with all of these, grand, things that illustrate their point. It's just racks and racks of possessions and rooms of possessions, just stuff that people brought over. They didn't know what to do with it, and they gave it to the museum because it's great grandma's old trunk full of her shit that nobody knows what to do with. And in that, they do have from Joseph Smith one of his shirts that has some sweat stains on it, which leads me to believe that you could probably extract Joseph Smith's DNA from those sweat stains, in case that his DNA has not been properly sequenced. But if I'm not mistaken, his paternal DNA mitochondria has been sequenced. I can't remember. And that was used to. We could clone Joseph Smith.
I don't think we need to clone. No. This is you don't want to clone Joseph Smith during the Me Too movement. Right. He ain't nothing but a horn dog.
He would probably get along pretty well in the post-truth age. So, but he would definitely be excommunicated from the church today. So it would be fun to see. Anyway, that was a digression. Needless to say, yes. Polygamy is a fun subject. Just Alice's commentary is great here.
We'll be friends by the end of this, Alice.
Thank you for being here, Alice. I love it when you're in the chat. So, okay, I want to talk a little bit more at the higher level of atheism in general, not just Mormonism and ex-Mormonism, because you work with the ACA, the Atheist Community of Austin, which that really helped me in my transitioning phase from apatheist of not really caring,
right,
to like, oh, wow, religion is really harmful, and people that believe in some version of theism, they should be challenged with that. And atheism seems like the best way to do that. And that's when I started like learning the arguments and the atheist experience. That was my show. That was how I learned how to communicate these concepts and how to understand very tightly distilled version of those. And that's put on by the Atheist Community of Austin. So that's the organization you work with, right?
Yeah. So, so I'll talk about that. I want to actually mention though, too, as we jump into there, how common your story is and was my story too. You go from being a Mormon to usually this middle ground of like, I don't care. The apatheist, I think you called it. I've seen the term used. I just have never personally used it. And then on to atheist. And there's a few things that I think is funny about it. First of all, I think the Mormon church is actually pretty good at teaching the concept of the church is true or nothing's true.
Right,
like it's pretty good at disproving all of the other religions. Then when you realize it's bullshit too, you don't really go, all right, let me head to one of these others. It's a pretty common thing that happens. And so that eventual, but then I also wonder, it is that I think shame level and because you leave the church and like if I am super active and open about not being a Mormon, people will think that instantly means I'm actually miserable and loving a sin and all these things that I think a lot of people recede into it because they don't want to have the level of like cutting off that Jehovah's Witnesses have, for example.
Right.
But yeah, so I work with the atheist community of Austin. I actually have another show called The Atheist Interviews. We'll be releasing an episode this week with Mendisa Thomas. I've interviewed Matt Dillahunty, but it's a very new show. I started working with them back in February. I'll actually be heading down to Austin at some point in the future to help them with both production and events here in the future. But yeah, I mean, the Atheist Experience is a weekly show where people call in and go, don't realize how much they're helping people with doubts because they say the things of like, okay, here's something stupid. For example, if you're having a hard time with evolution, someone at some point is going to call in or has called in and said, well, I just don't understand. If we all came from monkeys, why are there still monkeys? Which is something that all of us who didn't believe in evolution at one point said. I don't know if you
said or heard a family member say or whatever. Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And I think that's why they're so useful because you get to hear like it's not competing Bible study. It's not, no, when Jesus said it, he actually meant that. It's literally, I believe this. Okay, why? Because of this. Do you really think that's good enough? Sure, I do. I don't. Great. Okay, bye. And it's good to actually see that conversation is capable of being had, because prior to becoming an atheist, my thought was the atheists are the adversary and they're just here to try and make you doubt your faith and not do anything with intellectual honesty or head toward any sort of purpose or meaning. How can an atheist even have meaning? That kind of bullshit.
Yeah. And they deal with those subjects every episode because I mean, they just take the Christian, Muslim, whatever, Mormon callers. I can't remember. I don't think I've ever actually seen a Mormon caller because they
exist.
They exist. Okay.
There are a few. Yeah.
They have, I mean, are they over 1,000 episodes now?
Yeah. So they hit 1,000 mid last month was their 1,000th. That's a word I have a hard time saying because I have an old lisp. Episode 1000.
Because I've listened to in total maybe 150 to 200 of the episodes, and I don't think I ever heard a Mormon caller at any of those episodes. So when they do appear, they must be really few and far between. But
the one I'm thinking of the most was actually a guy who was kind of came in. And he's like, yeah, but what about this? And then they were like, okay, but that's dumb. What about this? And the guy was like, yeah, that's actually what I'm struggling with right now. And by the end of the call, like presented himself as like ready to take these people to task. And then was like, actually the points you're coming back with right now are kind of why I'm thinking about leaving the church. That's the one I'm thinking of most predominantly. I know there's been more over the years too. There's also a lot of episodes that are lost too, because from like the really early days, they just don't exist anywhere. They were on VHSs and now they're gone. But yeah, they've done, they got to 1,000 episodes. There's been a few Mormons. Mormonism will occasionally also come up. But yeah, I really wish more Mormon callers would call in. Street epistemology. Anthony seems to have no problem getting Mormons in front of him. But yeah, anyway.
Well, I think because we're taught in the church to not be combative, right? And I was always told that, like in seminary, you don't Bible bash with those Jehovah's Witnesses that are standing outside the seminary building because nobody ever wins a Bible bashing. I didn't realize that's because Mormons typically don't know that much about the Bibles, and it turns out that a lot of Christians don't typically know much about the Bible. And you study the Bible deep enough, or if you read it cover to cover, it's oftentimes a quick path to atheism. So I think it's important to note that, there's a vested interest in Mormons not debating other Christians about Jesus.
Right. Yeah. And I think even with some of the callers that I'm thinking of now, a lot of times if a Mormon calls into it, they're more trying to talk to the audience or point out the flaws or the things missing or whatever, as opposed to actually trying to engage in the debate, which is pretty typical of what you're talking about too.
Yeah.
Whereas with street epistemology, Anthony's coming out and saying, I just want to know what you believe. And that's the instant Mormon erection for any true believer. Like, oh, you do? You'd like to hear about this?
Why don't I just bust out my testimony all over here? Yep.
Yeah. I'll
But-
bust it all over your... Anyway, go ahead.
So, yeah, Steven said in the chat here, you don't want those Mormons thinking about it too hard. Nothing good comes of that.
Yeah.
But that goes to something you said earlier, Jimmy. It's like Mormonism has a really good concept of teaching you that it's the church or nothing, that
Right.
all the other churches are evil, their professors are corrupt, and that this is the one true gospel of Jesus, and the gospel itself is perfect. You turn away
Right.
from that, you turn away from the church, you turn away from your family. There is nothing else. And
Yeah.
that alone, being indoctrinated with that perspective, that completely black and white perspective on religion, creates a lot of atheists when they leave.
It does. I think so too. Which, good. I mean, like,
Yeah.
thanks. You're doing half of the work for us. Like, all they have to do is realize Mormonism's bullshit, and then we got them.
Yeah, they just have to be an atheist about that 0.000, almost sigma 1% more gods.
Yeah.
But just take that last leap.
It's funny because I've known lots of returned missionaries that you'll be talking to and be like, look, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't make sense. And you can tell they struggle with it. And at some point they'll go, look, I don't necessarily understand why these things are. I still believe, blah, blah, blah. They do the little testimony.
I
And
believe.
yeah. And they're like, but I wouldn't want this taken away anyway, because I genuinely believe that it's either Mormonism or nothing. So if you took this away, I'd lose all meaning in my life. I have a sister who recently told me, we were talking about it, and you could tell she was getting into this area where she's like, I already know that when I think about this too much, the doubts get loud and I start to feel bad. And so the conversation literally ended with, please don't try and take this from me. And it's like, you have to at some point decide, what do you want to believe? Things that feel good to believe or things that are true. And they're not always going to be the same thing.
That's one reason why I've enjoyed watching so many Matt Dillahunty debates, watching and listening to Matt Dillahunty debates, seeing him on AXP so frequently, is because his catch line of I want to believe in as many true things and as few false things as I can
Right.
sits with me. Like, that's a statement that I sincerely believe. And
Which
that's hard to do, but it's a powerful thing.
Yeah, well, it's definitely hard to accomplish, having only believed in true things and not believe in false. But it's a way of life that I think most people have the ability to adopt. But I would have thought that phrase, when I first heard him say it, I want to believe in as many true things and as few false things. Like, of course you do. That's what everyone wants. Like, but that's not the case. And you can actually ask people directly that question, and you will find them going, no, I want to believe what makes me feel good or what causes harmony with my family. And I mean, the harmony with the family thing, obviously not always worded that way, but is a big one of like it doesn't matter if it's true because my family and I get along on this basis. And you can be the one thing I really enjoy about my position in life, which having this I need to preface this with like how hard it was to be the first person out of my family to go. When I have 12 siblings, 2 very faithful parents, and an extended family, that this is the central part of all of their lives and all of their personalities. Being the first one out was extremely stressful. But then, like, I also kind of like the idea of 100 years from now, people looking back and being like, yeah, so this guy was the person who brought them all into that cult. And this guy was the guy who got him out. And I'm the guy who got him out. Like, that's a little bit nice to feel, because if there's anything that makes it worth it, that would be it, because it sucked to be the first one out.
Yeah. I can't imagine that, because I'm atheists don't do genealogy.
Checkmate, atheists.
That's right. I have one sibling, an older sibling, and she blazed the trail for me. Right. So I didn't have to have all of the fights with my parents that she did. So I count my trail was already blazed in front of me. I didn't have to do all of that clearing of the path in order to get through it. And Yeah, she made it to where my parents, when I told them that I don't want to go to church anymore, they were just like, "That's your decision," because
Yeah.
she had gone through, I'm sure, many of the similar fights that you had to go through when you came out of the church.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's lots of arguments. It's lots of so, as is not uncommon with all religions, this isn't exclusive to Mormonism by any means, but it's a lot of, no, your points are wrong because here's a separate problem with you. Here's something as a kid that you did. My dad likes to bring up that I never got a patriarchal blessing, even though I left at somewhere between 18 and 20. The exact date, drugs. Anyway, I played around when but he will bring up, I never got a patriarchal blessing, but that's because I genuinely thought these guys had psychic powers and would know I was jacking off. Like, that's why I didn't do it. I thought that was going to be, and so it was just little bits of like, oh, let's put it off. We moved a lot. So it's like, let's do it at the next place.
Right.
And then it just ended up not happening. And that was like you never took it that seriously because you never got a patriarchal blessing. You let somebody else ordain you to the office of teacher instead of your dad, which was, I mean, granted, I didn't really care who, as far as like tradition and family loyalty stuff, that was more of a value of my dad, as I could give a shit less about traditions even now. And he was high council, so I didn't even know what Sunday he was actually going to be at that church at that time. Anyway, so yeah, that'll be the stuff. It won't be like, yeah, you're bringing up good points about how like we say that the racism was just mistakes made by men, but they were claiming prophecy and creating rituals around it. No, that doesn't matter because you've admitted you jerked off a lot. And that's the sort of, they attack your character and who you are and try to make you into the miserable sinner, because accepting that you have any points at best. And now I'm much better at it. Now I will just always get my dad into the corner where he has to go, this life is but a vapor. God will figure it out. I don't understand why things are that way, but this life is just a vapor.
I wonder if I could get your thoughts on humanizing people who've come out, right? So when you leave the church, the stigma built in that you left because you want to sin, you left because somebody hurt you, you left for, any other small number of reasons that usually do the person who left a disservice, because oftentimes it is a very intellectual and a long and toilsome journey to get through in order to transition out of the church. But being able to humanize people who have left the church as just you're the same kid, the same family member, the same parent, the same sibling, and who used to be a member of the church, they're still the same person. They just don't believe in something that they used to believe in. They flip-flopped on something, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that there's any power in being able to humanize people in that way and make it so it kind of normalizes the fact that there are atheists who are ex-Mormon and do not, subscribe to it anymore, and I think, maybe, mesh the cultures a little bit more?
Yeah, that end part makes it a lot harder. There's definitely got to be some level of separation. And the reason I say that is I was a good person starting on my first day not being a Mormon. There has to be a separation of, I don't know that I agree with the phrase, it's still the same person, because I am not. And maybe it is in a lot of cases. Certainly there's a lot of values that are the same, but the way that you understand the ways to actually express charity, to express love, to express concern, often completely change. So it's like, yes, this person is still a person. They're worth your love. They're worth your care. Your family doesn't have to break up because of it. You don't have to pretend they don't exist. Some level of that's going to happen and you can't resist it. I've been out of the church around 10 years now. And this is literally an Instagram message I got, July 28th. So just a couple weeks ago. Starts with, why do you have to bash Mormonism? I say something like, Mormonism bashes itself. I present the truth, blah, blah, blah. Just like the little snippy quibs. Right. She's saying she understands, but she thinks that it's some of the stuff I'm doing is dishonest, and saying that it's evil is dishonest. But then she goes, let's see. I want to find the exact place where she goes, all I've gathered is that it seems like you have been hurt by the actual members of the congregation, including the apostles and prophets, but not necessarily the teachings of the church, which is bullshit. And so 10 years later, I'm still hearing I left because I was hurt. As a matter of fact, I left because I was trying to prove the church true. And in trying to prove the church true, couldn't for myself, found out that it was false. Mm-hmm. So some level of that you're never going to escape from. As far as like, yes, you have to humanize, obviously to some degree, but there also has to be a separation. And I think that it's quite good to go to say, like, I didn't know what being a good person was because I only saw that caricature as portrayed by the church. And now I'm a decent human being, and the church was stopping me from doing that. Because if you just go with like, oh, they're the same person, that's how my friend Josh died when I was around 17. He was 2 years older than me. Bisexual, hated the church at this point, didn't want anything to do with it. And yet I'm at the service in a Mormon church where they're talking about how spiritual he was, how even though he went through struggles, he was always this, and it was frankly an offensive way to portray someone because I know he wouldn't have liked it.
Interesting. Okay.
And so, yeah, don't die. If you leave Mormonism and it's important to you that you've made that change in your life, I don't know that you want to portray things in a way that if you die, people will basically get to pretend you never left. I think it is important to have some level of separation.
Yeah. So I guess that's kind of not the way that I was trying to communicate it. But I do agree with what you're saying, that there needs to be a threshold that you cross over when you say, I no longer believe in the church, and I want you to respect that. But what I'm looking at is the forceful coexistence that inherently has to transcend the conflict between family members.
Yeah.
Like, and that has to be normalized because I mean, if we look back 150 years ago in Utah Mormonism, it was a survival mechanism to excise people when they dissented or when they left the church. It was a survival mechanism because they would die. They would die. They would be cut off. They would be forced out of town, whatever. Utah was not a friendly area to people who were not Mormon, especially those who had been Mormon and left, right? So that culture still exists. It's just a much more moderate version of that. Right? It's a much more socially acceptable 20th or 21st century version of that same shunning that happens. But the world in Utah now is becoming more and more pluralistic and more of a cultural melting pot. And Salt Lake City is becoming a counterculture within Utah. And I think it's important to point out that I'm still the same person. I may have different beliefs. I may have a different perspective on reality and morality, but I'm still the same Jimmy. I'm still the same Brian. I'm still the same Alice. I'm still the same person who I was when I was a member of the church. I just no longer believe the things that you do. And the sooner that you accept that, the sooner we can meet each other on the same ground and talk beyond things that seem to be the central conflict that so many of our conversations are built around.
I think what I was probably getting caught up on then was the same part. And so maybe and I'm not disagreeing with you. I think I agree with everything you said. I think the way I would phrase it isn't so much as I'm still the same person, is just like, I'm still a person, which warrants some level of respect. And I'm a person you're related to, which, if that's a value of yours, should matter, which, to tell you the truth, on my end, I'm cordial with a lot of my family. I let go a lot of that. And so maybe I'm the worst person to ask for this, because on my end, I let go a lot of my family and just went, you know what? Just because we share some DNA doesn't mean I'm obligated to be a family with these people. So a lot of my family, we still talk. My dad and I give each other the business, and there's still a type of love there. But then there's other family members where I'm like, the same sperm factory made you as me, and that's about it. Like, that's the I always call my dad on, or lately whenever I call my dad on like Father's Day or my birthday or something, and be like, hey, this is the anniversary of that time that you degraded my mother. Something like that. It's like, how dare you?
Well, I also would like to point out briefly, and after saying this, I kind of want to send it to anybody in the panel who might have a question or who might have anything that they want to add. But I think there's also a value to being able to be a resource for family members who may be questioning.
Definitely.
And that's something that I've only recently experienced at my latest, extended family reunion, where people in my family have learned that I make a living off of anti-Mormon propaganda. That's the great rumor mill among the Blankenagel family. And
did you resign or have you been excommunicated?
Neither, actually.
Me too. And how am I not excommunicated yet?
Because
I've said it on the air. I do gay stuff. How have I not earned it yet?
your kids can't be members, so it's a cultural evolution. It's just going to slowly work your line out of Mormonism.
I think my dad may have forged a resignation letter. I think I might actually be out and not realize it. True story.
But I think there is value in that, though. Because at this last reunion, I had an extended family member who I've never spoken with before, who I've never sat down with around a campfire and had an extended conversation come up and talk to me very openly and in a very vulnerable state of mind, and said, what kind of places or where do you go to learn what you learn about Mormon history?
Very cool. Yeah.
And when somebody's willing to come to me, when an extended family member will come to me with a question like that's sincere. Like that's an opening to have a really meaningful conversation. And it shows that there are fractures in that person's, shelf. It's the mounting brackets are starting to bore a hole in the wall that's larger than the nail that's holding them in. So I think that
hopefully it wasn't just like research where they're like going to go now home and look up all the things and look up all of the ways the church have been like, well, actually fair Mormon ...
Yeah, no, she actually works for SCMC, and now they know where to find me thanks to her.
Nice.
Strengthening Church Members Committee. That's like their underground police force.
Oh man. I guess if I'd amend something that I was saying earlier, because again, I get that. I agree with everything you said, and I'm worried that the things I was saying was making it seem like a branch off. It is important. Don't be the caricature of the ex-Mormon that they want you to be, because your whole life they've said you're going to go off and you're going to do a bunch of drugs, even though I did, and you're going to drink, even though I did, and you're going to do all these things, but then you're going to be this evil, miserable person. Don't be a miserable person, because they said. But as far as don't walk out the door and say, fuck you, I never want to see you all again. Have the seeds and still try to maintain the family relationship. But I would probably prioritize first, as you leave, finding a new community and support structure that can be there to hold you up for whatever they now won't until they maybe will again.
Absolutely.
That'd probably be priority number one. Go find the people who, if you need to replace church, find a church replacement. If you need to replace certain rituals and schedules, do that, and then work on building back up those relationships. And probably don't, in your first year of atheism, debate on behalf of atheism, because you're not going to be any good at it. You're going to think you're good at it because you're going to be repeating like these brilliant Christopher Hitchens lines. And then all you're going to do is help your family prepare their apologetics in a way that evolves with you as your debates actually evolve. Because that's what happened with me. Because even though I can kick my dad's ass at the debate up and down, it has no effect on his level of doubts or faith anymore.
Right. And there's something also to be said about understanding what somebody says, or just parroting what somebody says, versus understanding the underlying idea of where that comes from. Right. And when you engage in apologetics and counter apologetics, I think it's necessary to truly understand the foundations underlying the points that are being made.
Exactly. And there's only one Hitchens. You're not going to be the next one, no matter how bad I want to be.
And really, and now because there is no more Hitchens anymore, he just lives in infamy in amazing YouTube, iconic YouTube debates. There's only one Dillahunty right now. And I truly, sincerely believe that Dillahunty is one of the best philosophy debaters that we have right now, because he's so accessible, so communicative. And what he says is very basic and dumbed down and extremely easy to comprehend.
Right. He can talk to idiots and intellectuals. He can
Exactly. I just only quite recently watched his debate with Jordan B. Peterson, and I was following Jordan B. Peterson, understanding all of the buzzwords that he was using that his community was picking up on, and then watching Dillahunty respond and just thrash him with 1/10 of the consonants that Jordan Peterson was using in what he said,
and none of the education. I mean,
Exactly.
Dillahunty doesn't have a degree of any kind. He's a magician, and a really good one. And him and I literally, so in the times we've done stuff together, interviews and shows and stuff, we usually kill an hour beforehand just talking about magic, because I used to be a magician myself.
Awesome.
But he gets doubt. It is what his expertise is in, skepticism, and he can go toe to toe with a PhD from 1990. And I'm not saying that invalidates it, but Jordan Peterson's understanding of psychology has not evolved since whatever psychology understood in 1990. Anyway,
Fair.
He's also just a giant douche. Don't throw that out there.
Mm-hmm.
He's the American Christian Deepak Chopra. Undoubtedly.
And with a better vocabulary, but not better arguments. His arguments are there's no real atheists. If they're good people, then they are at least pretending they believe in God. Things that are really simple concepts to us now that takes an incredible level of denial for Peters. Anyway, by the way, I wanted to point out something funny, that you haven't lost the Mormon habit of including middle initials when you talk about somebody. Jordan B. Peterson.
Oh.
I just call him Jordan Peterson, man. And hello, B. Lee Spencer, W. Campbell.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, everybody. I shouldn't. That song's now in your head.
Such a yes. Oh, yeah. Peterson is Canadian. That's right. I forgot about that.
He is. Yeah.
Yep.
And he once didn't sleep for 28 days because he drank some cider. That's his claim, that he didn't sleep for 28 days straight because of a reaction to sulfides in cider.
That's a pretty awesome claim, isn't it?
It's incredible. Almost
incredible.
Almost too incredible to believe.
Almost uncredible. Is he dead? You would think, but unfortunately, no. No, I shouldn't say unfortunately, no.
Why not? Because he is a meme to culture right now that is using a vocabulary to give power to encourage very simple-minded. These are the type of people who buy essential oils. Like, they are very simple-minded people who go. So, for example, here's one of the things from his books, from his 12 things, and I've talked about this one in particular a lot because it is so close to me. It sounds like very good advice. Don't let your children develop in any way that would make you hate them. Sounds like great advice. Terrible advice for the kinds of people who's actually reading it and going, you're right, I should control what this person's personality is like. That's what my parents did in trying to force Mormonism on me and not let me be anything but this very defined, these need to be your values, these need to be the kinds of careers you're going after. And it was terrible. Trying to control it just made me resent them more. If I had any level of freedom, and in fact, once I had freedom because they couldn't stop me, I was out of the house and I was living on my own, and my relationship with them got a lot better because I could just talk to them as we're both human. So he gives these pieces of very dumbed down advice that suck, but they sound good. Anyway,
really big, pretty words.
I could go on about Jordan Peterson and his metaphysical substrate. Well, I don't know. What is a God?
Oh, joy. So I, of course, I want to open it up to everybody. Any thoughts people want to chime in with? Alice, I noticed that you said he is evil, referring to Jordan B. Peterson. He is evil on the level where I don't wish someone to kill him, but will be happy when he is dead. I would love to hear you expound on that, if you're willing to, Alice.
I don't need him to be dead. I just need him to be irrelevant. So let's find out that he, I don't know, beats his wife. No, I don't want his wife to now have been being beaten. Let's something that he did. Let's Me Too him. He's a white guy with money and power. At some point, he tried to finger someone he shouldn't. I'm just saying. I'm just kidding.
Weaponizing anti-rape with me. Let's Me Too somebody.
Only if he did it. I'm just saying the statistics say he probably did. And look, I'm a
I
white
just
dude.
got
I don't
really
have any-
uncomfortable. Really uncomfortable.
I fit the profile except for not having any money or power. But other than that, I'm just saying.
So Alice, you're unmuted. Please talk. Please stop us from talking.
He wants you to stop me.
I was thinking of it similar to I'm getting the names of the Supreme Court justices mixed up. Scalia. He made it clear he was never going to leave and retire. So when he died, I was happy. I was not happy because he died. I was happy because he couldn't hurt anyone anymore. And
yeah,
like when
Absolutely.
Peterson becomes irrelevant in whatever way, I looked at it similar to that. So
Unfortunately, he's at the height of popularity. So where right now, if he died for at least a while, he'd be more famous than ever. It'd be worse. So you need not actually a Me Too thing. That was just a joke for everyone who's going to freak out about that. This has happened before. Anyway, something, it would be, if he's got a skeleton that's already there, someone find it. Pull it out of the closet.
Russian hackers, get them.
Yeah. Russia, if you're listening, please go after the 30,000 Jordan Peterson emails.
Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro are both extremely good at rhetoric and debate, but not good with facts and not good when you fact check them. You can show why their arguments are fallacious, but people
right.
Like
I would give Ben
videos, which is why I would never get on a stage with them. You don't play them by their game or they will win.
Right. Ben, I think, is better at it. I agree with your description of him. It's dishonest. He's extremely selective with his facts. His applications of statistics is like freshman stats. Like when you take your first freshman statistics course in college, and they're like, here's all of the things you're not supposed to do with stats, and he's just like, I'm not gonna show up that day. His application, but I would say he's actually better at the debate end than Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson, in every debate I've seen, only wins his fans. I don't see him winning new minds or undecided minds. And just go to his threads and see all of the people, like on Reddit, who think that he annihilated Matt Dillahunty. And it's like, what debate were you watching? These are the same people who probably think Ken Ham beat Bill Nye. Please.
Well, let me shed my perspective on that, because I came away from the Dillahunty Peterson debate saying, I know for a fact that because of the buzzwords, because of the rhetoric that was being thrown out by Peterson, that I watched a different debate than people who are fans of Peterson. And that's just a fact. We see it different things when
on both sides.
Exactly.
What matters is the undecided, or
there's
the
good people on both sides. Absolutely.
Good people on both sides.
Good logic on both sides.
There's no good Jordan Peterson fans. Another joke. Go ahead, internet. Do what you will.
No, that's accurate.
I have a friend who her and I agree on almost everything, but she's just one of those. Well, he's just taken out of context, but then also will say, but he speaks very deliberately. Like he means what he says, but then he took it out of well, which fucking one is it? Does he mean what he says and his words are enough, or do I now have to go read 12 goddamn books? And by the way, I don't know anyone who's watched more of his lectures than I have. I will say I initially was seduced by him. The first stuff I saw, I was like, oh, okay. Then he started talking about gender stuff, and I was like, man, I don't think you actually understand the thing you're claiming to understand. And then it just got worse and worse, and I saw his representation of atheism and went, oh, those bad arguments he uses for atheism, he uses that type of argument and structure for everything else. It's all meaningless.
I became aware of him with C16 and that whole debate.
The bill he lies about.
Yeah, the one that he claims someone could make a 16-digit number as a gender, and he could go to jail if he doesn't use it. And
even without going to that extreme, he makes the claim, period, that any pronoun would be mandated, and it's not that case. It would become, trans would become a protected class, and therefore one could make the case that at work, the purposeful use of misgendering could be qualified as harassment, but he's acting like if you just walk up on somebody and accidentally call a they a he, you could go to jail, which is utter bullshit.
Yes, fully agree with that. And Thomas Smith did a good breakdown of why he was wrong on those, and that's when I became aware of him. And then I found out about his anti-feminism stuff from before that, and just everything he does. The reason I say he's good at debate is like his interview that got so famous, where the person tried to catch him in a lie, and he just refused to be pinned down on any point. And she seemed like she was strawmanning him. Well, she was trying to get him to hold to points that he had actually spouted in his rhetoric, but he refuses to be tied down to these
Right.
points.
He tries to generally speak ambiguously so that everything was like, I was just asking the question. I wasn't making any sort of statement or claim. But in reality, but my Peterson impression's getting better, but it's not great yet. But he also will speak a little bit more deliberately depending on his audience, but will still try and retain a level of ambiguity that always permits him deniability. And then he has such strange standards. So for example, he was asked if he thinks women should be allowed, if men and women can work together in the workplace. And he said, I don't know. We only have 40 years of that happening. It's only 40 years. Is that enough data to go off of? There's some other issue, and I wish I could remember what it was, that he says very directly, like, this doesn't work, and we do know this because of 40 years of data. So he's used this number 40 twice, and I'm sorry, I forgot what the other issue was. Once saying it wasn't enough time to know, and the other time saying it was.
Which is why, like I said, they're easy to fact check.
Yeah.
But in the moment, their rhetoric is very persuasive, and that's why they're good at debating and such.
Ben Shapiro, my biggest qualm with him, I feel like he'd be a person who you could have very interesting discussions with. I think he is generally wrong on a lot of things, but I don't think I'd have to have a relationship with him where I hated him all the time. It's the level of like, that guy has to have ribs missing because there's no way he's not sucking his own dick all the time. That guy just has a way of saying things and has this little like at the end of every sentence where he just, if he had a mic, he'd drop it every time, regardless of what it was doing. I'll have tea and crumpets. He just is a miserable little cockroach, I think.
His stances on transgender people make it where I can't even like him on an intellectual level. It's just
and I wasn't saying I do like him at all. I'm saying I think if he didn't have that smugness, I could talk to him. The smugness is what drives me crazy. I'm surrounded by, I was raised mostly conservative. I was a Republican even a little bit after becoming an atheist. It's not but I've to only be friends with people who share my values or to defriend everyone who's just wrong about things like trans issues would mean not knowing almost anybody at this point.
well, I have friends and coworkers who are very much of the love the sinner, hate the sin, and that I still don't like, but I can deal with that. Or
Yeah.
I'm one of the good ones, but
Oh yeah, I'm one of the good ones. So fucking condescending.
actively hurting trans people. And
Right.
just look up Ben Shapiro owns transgender activists or whatever, and it's a college student who doesn't know how to debate, and he's basically trying to spout the whole transgender isn't a thing. And
Right. He does the same thing Fox News does. He goes and he gets the shittiest representatives. He sets up for the fights he knows he can win, just like he's trying to take on this Democratic Socialist from New York because she's 28 and mostly an idealist. And I agree that he would probably destroy her in debate, and he knows that, and that's why he wants her in front of him. As wouldn't make him right, it would make him a better debater than her, but it wouldn't actually make him right. So it's yeah. The hard part is I am not of the type of deplatforming or telling people with bad ideas to be quiet or trying to shut them up. I am if we're right, go win the war of ideas. For the most part, we've done that with gay marriage. We won the war of ideas. It wasn't shut down every platform and every voice that was anti-gay marriage. And so I'm more in favor of beating Ben Shapiro, where a lot of people seem to be more in favor of quieting Ben Shapiro.
I don't take either as the way to go. I say we can't play by their rules, though. If you try and take on Ben Shapiro in a debate, you're taking him on in his arena where he's comfortable. Whereas if you're able to fact check him, he's a lot weaker.
Yeah, I think there are people though who can defeat him in debate. I don't know if we've seen it or not, but
probably could, and I think if we saw that, it would be. But Danny Rossari did a good series called the Alt-Right Playbook, and then he also did a talk where he talks about how debating issues of human rights is actually dangerous because basically you get people will generally change their mind one of two ways when they hear a debate. They'll either possibly move towards the opposite side, or they'll double down on the side they believe in. And when you have people doubling down on anti-trans rights, that's how people get killed.
The backfire effect. I just want to add that in, that Walker commented, the backfire effect. That's exactly what it is.
Right. And so the methods that by which you communicate certainly can't be only debate, but I would still stand by, you're not going to win by shaming people. You're not going to win by deplatforming. You're not going to win by shouting them down, because we tried that during the Barack Obama years, and now Donald Trump is president. We shouted down a lot of people. We told them to be quiet. And basically the racists all found each other, and then were empowered by one guy. And now that one guy is president. So
Deplatforming is problematic because it makes them a martyr. It gives them a voice of, oh look, my free speech, etc. Even though they're misusing that term wholeheartedly, their base goes to that and doubles down again. So I mean, it gets the same thing that they want. It gets them the publicity, and it gets people to their side and to their cause. So we need to find another way, and I don't have the answer, unfortunately. I'm not claiming to have the answer. I'm just saying I see the inherent problems with this. And the best thing I liked about the Jordan B. Peterson, Matt Dillahunty debate was it focused on religion and not on his social implications, because I see the problems inherent in debating civil.
Yeah. The same thing needs to be done at Ben. Like, hey, this guy you're putting all of your cards behind, let's really dive into what he believes happens after you die. That definitely needs to happen more, because generally the only spaces it happens right now are with people who are neutral or agree with him already. So it's just a back and forth jerking off of each other's ideas.
And so, yeah, I have no problems with people debating religion, but when people are debating feminism, Black Lives Matter, or transgender rights, LGBT rights, these are somewhat dangerous to do because it can cause more harm than good sometimes.
Yeah, I still would say don't have no debate, but obviously you do have to be careful, and you have to control. And then there are some people that just aren't worth having to the show, because they're not, as you kind of talked about, they're going to play by their own words. Nobody needs to argue with Cy 10 about his anti-epistemology bullshit, because his own arguments void his argument. And the guy's just dishonest and goes to one person, doesn't succeed, but his believers all think he succeeds. And then he moves to the next guy and tries to do it again and tries to do it again. And is basically living a life of demanding other people's platforms to get out his dishonest bullshit. So you do have to talk about who you let in. But again, like, you're not going to win a war of ideas by silencing one side, because we saw that not play out so well in the 2008 election.
Like I said, I'm not saying we should.
No, I know.
We shouldn't.
Yeah.
I don't agree with people blocking them from speaking at colleges or anything. I just think we have to be very careful in debating these kind of issues for the reasons I said. And like we saw NPR made a huge gaffe, if you heard about that over the weekend, or late last week, when they let the person who set up the Unite the Right rally in DC rank the intelligence of the races on air, and then gave him equal time to a Black Lives Matter counter protester, and it puts him on a level where these ideas are treated as equal to the other, and it's just bad journalism.
Yeah, I don't know that I agree with that. Because I mean, we've, for example, had lots of very useful and successful debates on evolution versus creationism, and the only equality it's given is you both get to say your ideas, but it doesn't mean that it's equality of intake, and it's not equality and reasonability. And while individual creationists have occasionally been better at debating than individual evolutionary biologists or people just there debating on behalf of evolution, the net effect has been evolution is not going to be challenged as an actual science in classrooms, and that debate is being won in most of the country, has won, and the quality of the debaters, while there's an effect on the individual debate, doesn't necessarily mean that overall they're going to win just because they had better debaters. We found the people, and I think this is true there's so many people in the world that if you are in the right, you're going to be able to find somebody to represent that who has a lot of historical knowledge, just is in general a smart person, but also a good communicator. So I don't necessarily agree with the idea of simply. Now, I know Richard Dawkins, who has debated creationists, has said sometimes if you debate a creationist as an evolutionary biologist, you're only improving their resume and not yours. But especially when it's an idea that seems like a minority idea, but has a lot of power in the country, like can elect the president, I do believe in debating, because you can't let those things go unchallenged.
Interesting.
But that's just me.
I learned a lot just now. Thank you both for that little exchange. Of course, I think we should probably bring things up to Walker just said Intelligence Squared does a really good debate series. That was that. I think the first one that I listened to was it Hitchens and Fry versus the two Catholics or whatever.
Oh, I'm sorry that was your first one, because that's one of the greatest debates of all time.
Oh my, yeah, well, it is amazing. Yeah.
And then the rest was all just vegetables from then on. That's seriously maybe my favorite debate. They also have done like panel debates where it's more like it kind of looks like a news show. Richard Dawkins years ago with that Australian bishop who looked like he was going to be Pope and now is getting a lot of Cardinal Pell. He debated Cardinal Pell, and they're great. Yeah.
Dawkins has had some pretty stalwart moments in spite of his let's just say his antiquated culture from which he sprang. Needless to say, this has been really fun to have you on, Jimmy.
Thank you.
Does anybody else want to chime in? Any concluding thoughts from the panel here?
Any more impressions people want to hear?
I do a rather good Stewie Griffin.
That was fucking good.
Oh, thank you. I've been working on it since I was about 14. It's something I learned how to do first when I had a cold, and then it got better over time.
Shay. Mama!
Thank you. Mommy! Ba! Lewis.
Brian, did you want to chime in there?
Well, I wish I had a little more to add, but I would just say great hangout, guys. And yeah, it was a lot of fun.
'Twas a gay old time.
That was, in all senses of the term.
Indeed.
Well, thank you to everybody on the panel. Thank you to those of you in the YouTube chat who joined in and chimed in. Really quickly, we had Christy Santiago, who says Hitchens was so brilliant. Stewie, looks like she was excited. Phenomenal, Stewie. And also said, Jimmy, you've come so far. I'm so proud of you. You're a beautiful human. That's your power. And she said that in response to one of your earlier comments. So to everybody in the chat, everybody on the panel, and especially to you, Jimmy, for being our featured guest, thank you all so much for joining and for hanging out tonight. It's been a lot of fun.
Tons of fun. I loved it.
Awesome. All right. And you'll be able to find a link to this up in the Patreon feed or on social media for Naked Mormonism. You'll also be able to find links to Mr. Atheist's YouTube channel. And really, if you want to get a little deeper dive on his views of Mormonism, Mormon history, you got the What's Wrong with Mormonism series, but there's also a ton of other content there that's really good. The video that he had with Matt Dillahunty and 3 other hosts about Jordan B. Peterson was hilarious.
And there's this
give it a watch, everybody.
There's this really good thing about Joseph Smith's rise to political power, where with Naked Mormonism, I don't know if you've heard of him. He came on that was out last Tuesday, and I think we have a part 2 that's about Brigham Young, but I think it's not going to be out till Wednesday. Sorry.
So yeah, be sure to check that out, everybody. And once again, thank you all for joining us. Take care, everybody.
Bye, everyone.